Alright, first up we've got Nothing Can Stop Us, a Shaman spell. 3 mana, give your minions +1/+1, give your Murlocs an extra +1/+1. So straight up, give your minions +1/+1, that is definitely not worth 3 mana. Shaman already has, like, Storm's Wrath, which is much better than that, and it's not like that card is breaking the Shaman class by any means. But if you assume that your board is all Murlocs and 3 mana give your board +2/+2, that's really, really strong. I mean, we know that Savage Roar is an insane card, and this is, you know, double Savage Roar stats, basically, since you also get the health. But of course, whether or not this is playable comes down to, is Murloc Shaman a thing? And that I'm a little bit skeptical about. Shaman does have a pretty solid package of Murloc cards right now. Sludge Slurper, Soul of the Murloc, Underbelly Angler. But all of these cards except Magic Fin are leaving with rotation. And from neutrals we're losing like Murmy and Toxfin. And maybe more importantly, we're losing Murloc War Leader in the core set. So currently it doesn't really look like Murlocs are supported like well enough to justify playing this card. I mean, we can still play Tidecaller. I think Tidehunter survives the rotation. Crab Rider is of course a very good card. But it seems like we're going to be kind of stretching to have enough Murlocs. And I do think you need a pretty high number of Murlocs to make this card playable. So with the current card pool, I think actually quite a bit can stop Murloc Shaman from being competitive. Next up we have Oil Rig Ambusher for Rogue. 4 mana 4/4, Battlecry, deal 2 damage. If this entered your hand this turn, deal 4 instead. So, I mean, I guess this is similar to SI7 Agent, but it's Battlecry instead of combo, which is nice. And it has the upside that sometimes it deals 4 instead of 2. 4 mana 4/4 versus 3 mana 3/3. I think those are like pretty comparable. But Battlecry over combo is pretty significant because like sometimes SI7 Agent is sort of like a 4 mana 3/3. And this Oil Rig Ambusher also has the upside of sometimes dealing 4 damage. And Rogue actually has a ton of card draw, so it's probably not that hard to add this to your hand on a specific turn. But my problem is just like if I'm playing Greyheart Sage and Cutting Class and Swindle and Secret Passage, do I really want to be playing this card? 4 mana is a lot to invest into a card in that deck, especially when you could be spending that mana on Penflinger instead. So like even with all that card draw that makes this effect pretty consistent, I don't know if you actually want to play this. It is worth noting though that Eviscerate is going to be gone from the core set, so maybe the deck is missing out on some damage. But Eviscerate for twice as much mana isn't super appealing to me. But maybe there's like some other archetype of rogue that would play this card. But even in those decks, I feel like 4 mana is a bit slow. And when this is only dealing 2 damage, it seems pretty underwhelming. I mean, when this is only dealing 2, it's pretty comparable to like Burrowing Scorpid, right? Which is a card that's seen relatively little play. And like Rogue even cares about the stealth upside on Scorpid potentially, and I don't think they've touched this card. So I can't really say I'm too optimistic for the Oil Rig Ambusher. It's definitely not like a straight up trash card. But with all the stuff Rogue can do right now, and just historically looking at Rogue, I kind of feel like 4 mana 4/4 with a somewhat conditional Battlecry is probably not going to make the cut. Next up we have Polkar Packrunner. A hunter minion, 2 mana 2/3, after you cast a spell, summon a 1/1 hyena with rush. Well, we did look through Hunter's spells in the previous video when we were talking about Barak Kodobane. And like Hunter does have a pretty good set of spells, but how many of them are you really happy to play alongside this card? Like, Adorable Infestation's pretty good, Demon Companion's pretty good, Tracking is pretty good, but really anything more expensive than that. Like, if this is turn 4, Pack Runner Explosive Trap, or Pack Runner Freezing Trap or whatever, I feel like that seems a little bit underwhelming. Granted, this doesn't have to be a combo card. You don't have to be like turn 4, this plus 2 mana spell. You can just play this on turn 2 as your 2-drop in Hunter, which is maybe pretty reasonable. But depending on the archetype of Hunter you're playing, other 2-drops are like Fellfire Deadeye, Imprisoned Felmaw, and then even in the neutrals, like maybe you just play a Bone Chewer Brawler over this or something. I don't know, I'm not super impressed by this card currently. I think it does require a decent amount of spell support to go with it, and then even then if you're only hitting like one spell on it, I feel like the effect isn't super powerful. With one spell, this is like a situational Bug Collector. Bug Collector's been a pretty trash card. I mean, you do get +2 health on your minion, which is significant, obviously. But I don't know, like a body that summons a 1/1 rush isn't too impressive, and this is situational on top of it. I have kind of a hard time imagining this seeing play, even really in the Barak deck. Next up we have Living Seed, the rank spell for Druid. 2 mana, draw a beast, reduce its cost by 1. At 5 mana, when you draw the beast, it reduces the cost by 2. At 10 mana, it reduces the cost by 3. And all of those spells are 2 mana. So I do think this is a pretty powerful spell. Even the base form on this is like pretty good. 2 mana, draw a card, reduces cost by 1. That's pretty solid. And it does target beasts, so you generally have a pretty good idea of what you're drawing with this. We did see in this set the Druid of the Plains, which is a very strong beast minion that you could potentially draw into with this. And we've also seen in the core set that like Menagerie Warden is coming back. So it does seem like there's a decent amount of support for this card. But it does feel like maybe the problem with this is actually going to be another beast support card for Druid, which is Guardian Animals. So if you're playing all those beasts, you probably want to play Guardian Animals. And if you're playing Guardian Animals, you kind of just want to leave the beasts in your deck, right? If you have Guardian Animals in hand, you don't really want to play Living Seed, and then the Living Seed draws out your Twilight Runner, and then like your Guardian Animals doesn't have enough targets for it. But Guardian Animals does have enough good targets that maybe that's not a big deal. You can just play 2 Runner, 2 Teacher's Pet, 2 Lake Thresher, and Moonfang. 7 targets for 2 Guardian Animals. And then sometimes your Living Seeds hits, or Living Seed rather, hits Druid of the Plains instead. So like maybe it's not too much anti-synergy, but it is something to keep in mind with this card. I guess you could also potentially play this in some sort of like aggressive Druid strategy. They did add Enchanted Raven back to the core set, and then you could put like Direwolf Alpha in that deck. You can play frickin' Stranglethorn Tiger or something, but I feel like that deck probably just isn't going to have enough support. The only other beast that I think really seems relevant with this is Umbral Owl. This is a pretty reasonable card to tutor into if your deck has the spells to support it. But I don't know that it's like, you'd probably need some other beast to play on top of this Umbral Owl. And I don't know what it would be if it's not a Guardian Animals deck. But something to consider. I think this card is definitely strong in a vacuum, and whether it's playable or not is pretty much just going to come down to whether or not you can play it alongside Guardian Animals. And I think if there's a conflict there, Guardian Animals is the better card. But maybe this card is just good enough that you play it alongside it. I mean, if you just play this on turn 2, and it gives you one of your 5 drops that you can play on turn 4, that's like pretty solid if you don't hit your Overgrowth that game. So maybe some like some weird overgrowth consistency thing is pretty playable. Next up we have Flurry, the mage rank spell. 0 mana, freeze a random enemy minion. At 5 mana, it freezes 2 random enemy minions. At 10 mana, it freezes 3 random enemy minions. And of course, at all those ranks, it continues to be a 0 cost spell. So yeah, I think this is the first rank spell we've seen. I think all the other ones have been 2 mana. This one gets to be 0 mana. And that's good, because freezing a random enemy minion is a pretty small effect. But we have seen from the Twin Spell card, Ray of Frost, that freezing 1 or 2 enemy minions is like a pretty annoying and pretty powerful effect. With Ray of Frost, you get to choose your 2 targets, you can split the targets across turns, whatever. But with Flurry, you don't have to pay any mana to do that, which is pretty nice. So if you're some sort of like combo deck, you can draw alongside the Flurry, or a tempo deck, you can develop alongside the Flurry. So I do think this card is potentially somewhat powerful. We have seen some mage decks that like 0 mana spells, and you know, combo with like Mana Cyclone, but Mana Cyclone's rotating, Sorcerer's Apprentice is rotating, so I'm not really sure if those types of strategies are really going to exist at all. But we do still have Mozaki in Standard, and Auctioneer also survived the core set, so maybe there's some sort of Mozaki mage still, and in that deck you would definitely want to play this because it's a 0 mana spell. Not sure how that deck functions without Sorcerer's Apprentice, but it could work. We do still have Incanter's Flow to enable it, so that could be a thing potentially. There's also a little bit of synergy with Glacier Racer, so you can just freeze 1 to 3 enemy minions and they all take 3 damage. Pretty solid. But probably the most interesting synergy with this is going to be the new Mage Legendary. So we've got Varden Dawngrasp. 4 mana 3/3 Battlecry, freeze all enemy minions. If any are already frozen, deal 4 damage to them instead. So as early as turn 4, you can just, well, I guess on turn 4 you'd only be freezing 1 thing, but say on like turn 5 you freeze 2 random enemy minions, and then this thing can deal 4 damage to both of them, as well as if your opponent has any other minions, you freeze those as well. So that would be a pretty interesting application of the Flurry. But even outside Flurry, Varden Dawngrasp seems like a pretty insane card. Frost Nova is a powerful card at 3 mana. For 1 more mana you get to slap it onto a 3/3 stick. Yeah, Frost Nova on a stick is quite a powerful card. I don't think this even needs to have the second part of the effect, where if they're already frozen, you deal 4 damage to them. I think without that it would still see play, but it does have that text. So, yeah, I mean, there's some upside there, but we are losing, like, Frost Nova, Frostbolt to the core set, Ray of Frost is rotating. Cone of Cold does get a buff, though, down to 3 mana. That could be significant. Brain Freeze is sticking around. Water Elemental is sticking around. I believe we're also losing Blizzard. So it's actually not super easy to freeze the enemy stuff to get this 4 damage dealt to them. But of course we do have Flurry. These other freeze cards are like pretty playable. And as I said, you don't actually need the second half of this effect for this card to be playable. So yeah, on its own, this card is definitely very strong. You probably just put it in like all of your mage decks. It's good for tempo, it's good for control. It's just a good card. So anyway, going back to Flurry, Varden Dawngrasp is a pretty good incentive to play this card. It is a little bit weird that it doesn't upgrade on the turn that Varden comes down, but you know, still maintains relevance later into the game. I am a little concerned that maybe like a control mage or something can't really play something with this little amount of value. But depending on what those control decks look like, it definitely is possible that they could play this card. Tempo sort of mage deck could also play this card. I think it has some real potential, but it's not a card I'm totally sold on in the same way as I am with Varden. Next up we have a Priest minion, Priest of Anshi. No clue how to pronounce that. 5 mana 5/5 taunt, Battlecry. If you've restored health this turn, gain +3/+3. So base form is a 5 mana 5/5 taunt. The payoff form is a 5 mana 8/8 taunt. 5 mana 8/8 taunt, definitely a playable card. But how easy is it to restore health on the turn that you play this? As far as like playing this on curve, really the only spell that works with it is going to be the new one, Desperate Prayer. 0 mana heal 5 to both players. And I mean, that's pretty good, especially since you'd want to be playing Desperate Prayer against aggro most likely. Turn 5, you heal for 5 and play an 8/8 taunt. That has a lot of potential to be basically a blowout turn against aggro. And if that's not a blowout turn, then you just curve that pair of cards into Light Shower Elemental, I believe it's called, the 6/6 that heals you for 8. So yeah, Priest has a really solid curve. Really solid anti-aggro curve, at least. But it might generally be pretty hard to activate this on curve. A Circle of Healing, I believe, does not survive the core set. So Desperate Prayer is the only way to do this on turn 5, unless you set up a Lifesteal minion. And, well, Priest actually does have some pretty decent lifesteal options. They have Reliquary of Souls, which is just a good card. Dragon Maw Sentinel is a little bit sketchier. But they do have Apotheosis, so just like turn 3 or turn 4 you Apotheosis something. Probably a good chance it doesn't die since you gave it +3 health. And then you can just Priest of Anshi leading into, or following that up. I guess maybe the issue with Apotheosis is after one hit of Apotheosis you might be at full health. But in that case you probably don't really need to play your 5 mana 8/8 taunt anyway. But you don't necessarily have to play this exactly on turn 5 for it to be good. You can also combo it with Renew on turn 6, and like that's just a pretty solid play as well. But I think the kicker for this card is that even if you don't get the Battlecry, 5 mana 5/5 taunt is like, obviously you wouldn't put that in your deck, but it's pretty acceptable. It's still good against aggro, and I don't think you're probably not losing games just because this wasn't upgraded on turn 5. If you're losing that game, something else went wrong. So yeah, I mean the upgraded form of this is obviously good. I think the base form is good enough that if a priest is playing, say, like Renew and Desperate Prayer, that this card would very easily just go into that deck. Next up, we've got some Warlock cards. This one is Bloodshard Bristleback. 3 mana 3/3 lifesteal. Battlecry, if your deck contains 10 or fewer cards, deals 6 damage to a minion. So it's important to remember that Battlecries that deal damage do benefit from lifesteal. So this is a giant heal if you manage to meet the conditional on it. 3 mana 3/3, deal 6, heal 6 immediately. That's definitely very powerful. We do know that historically, Control Warlock has tended to be garbage when they don't have heals, and pretty good when they do have heals. So any heal that you see in Warlock has to be carefully evaluated. Now, I do have a bit of an issue with this card, I think. Having 10 or fewer cards, even when you're life tapping all game, is not necessarily that easy to do. And also, like, even if you do manage to pull that off, it's probably going to be relatively late in the game. And historically, Warlock has needed the heals because they die to aggro, right? You don't necessarily need it against control matchups, although it's certainly not irrelevant. So yeah, it seems like you're probably not going to have this conditional active against aggro very often. But against aggro, it is still a 3 mana 3/3 lifesteal. Like, in the past, Priest had that card. Acolyte of something. Acolyte of Agony. And the card is pretty bad in Priest. But as it turns out, like, Acolyte of Agony is at its worst as a priest card and probably at its best as a warlock card. Because just the classes care different amounts about healing. So like just based on that, the Bloodshard Bristleback actually could see some play. And then of course in the control matchups where it goes late enough for this effect to be active, then, you know, the battle cry is obviously pretty insane. I do think, though, that currently Warlock is probably not as desperate for healing as it used to be. The core set is giving us Drain Soul back, and they're buffing it as well. It's going to be deal 3 damage, so that's going to be a pretty good heal for our control Warlocks. Siphon Soul is getting buffed down to 5 mana. And maybe more importantly, Warlock is still going to have all their Soul Fragment stuff, which is just like incidental healing. So I don't know that they're so desperate for heals going forward that they want to play a 3/3 lifesteal. But it's going to depend a lot on, like, do Warlock decks even play Soul Fragments? Does Warlock need the healing overall? Are there control matchups where the healing from this is relevant? So there's a lot of factors going into play with this Bloodshard Bristleback. Hard to say how much play it's going to see, but it's definitely a high enough power level card. Next up we have some support for the Bristleback, Soul Rend. This is 4 mana, deal 5 damage to all minions, destroy a card in your deck for each killed. So very powerful board clear effect. 4 mana deal 5 to all minions is pretty much unprecedented, I think. Outside of like Shadow Flame. But obviously a heavy drawback on this card, milling cards from your deck for how many you destroy. But I think the drawback on this card is really not that big of a deal. You figure this is killing, you know, I mean against aggro, this might kill 6 minions, but who gives a shit if you're milling cards against aggro? Against like some mid-range thing, you also probably don't really care that much about milling cards. And even in control matchups, where fatigue is sometimes relevant, I don't think this is that big of a drawback. Because for one, in those matchups, you're probably not destroying that many minions. If you play like 2 Soul Rends, you're probably milling like maybe 4 cards. And I mean, those 4 cards could be relevant. But you're probably still not going to lose in fatigue because you can just play Ticketus and mill like 10 or 15 cards from your opponent's deck. So you probably still win fatigue even if you play Soul Rend and control mirrors. And as I said, 4 mana deal 5 damage to all minions is an insane board clear. This is clearing boards that like almost no other spell would be able to clear. I mean, obviously it's going to depend a lot on the meta. If all the aggro decks are playing like 2 health minions, then you just don't need this card. But if there's like Chillwind Yetis coming down on turn 4 pretty often, then yeah, nice to be able to kill those. And Warlock might be in the market for a new AoE since they are losing Dark Skies to the rotation. They do have some other powerful AoE still, of course, with Hysteria most notably, but also like School Spirits. They do have Cascading Disaster, but this thing comes down way earlier than Cascading Disaster, Twisting Nether as well. So yeah, I actually think this card is pretty good. I don't think milling cards from your deck is that big of a deal, even in Warlock. Next up we have another Warlock AoE, Grimoire of Sacrifice. 1 mana, destroy a friendly minion, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. So obviously 1 mana Consecration is a very insane card, but I don't know how easy it's going to be for your control Warlock to have a minion to sacrifice. But it's actually probably not that hard, honestly. As control Warlock, you can be playing Spirit Jailer pretty comfortably. As far as neutrals, Armor Vendor is probably in your deck. You can maybe play Broomstick depending on what your deck looks like. They also have access to Tour Guide, which is just a good Warlock card anyway. So it does seem like it's actually not that hard, even for a control Warlock, to have random minions to sacrifice. You could also start getting into like Nerubian Egg kind of stuff. but I don't think your control warlock is really going to play like crappy death rattles or like weird death rattles just to support this card. But you can also activate your Nerubian Egg with like school spirits or whatever as well, so maybe that's just like a package that makes it into control warlocks. It is a very efficient AoE card. Like the last one, it's going to depend a lot on the meta, like is a 2 damage AoE relevant? Seems like historically a 2 damage AoE, at least one that's this cheap, is like pretty useful to have around. But I think this card actually has some potential to see play in like a more aggressive warlock as well. Obviously, a more aggressive warlock can play like a lot more like random garbage minions that are worth sacrificing. Possessed Villagers coming back in the core set. I mentioned Nerubian Egg already. That card is also coming back in the core set. If you can set up a swing where you, for 3 mana, make a 4/4 and kill your opponent's board, that's like devastating in some sort of like old school zoo mirror. And it's not just Nerubian Egg. There's the other egg, the Bone Web Egg, that Warlock is still going to have access to. So yeah, it seems like even an aggressive-ish Warlock could support this card. There's also like a new card in the core set that 0 mana, you sacrifice a thing, and if you had 5 things in play, you make a 5/5. So maybe they're just like really pushing Zoo in this direction of self-sacrifice. And if you're otherwise already playing all this stuff that's like fine to sacrifice, then it's very little cost to include the Grimoire of Sacrifice in your deck as well. So I actually think this card has a lot of potential, even across like different archetypes. Probably the biggest downside for it though is just like, does Control Warlock really need this? They have Soul Rend that we just looked at. They are losing Dark Skies, but they still have Hysteria. They have School Spirits potentially. But I mean, sometimes Warlock does just want to jam in like every AoE card they can get their hands on. So yeah, a lot of potential for this card, I would say. And next up we have yet another Warlock card. This one's a legendary. Tamsin Roam. 3 mana 1/3, whenever you cast a shadow spell that costs 1 or more, add a copy to your hand that costs 0. So this card is obviously hard to evaluate if we don't know which spells are shadow spells. But the core set is getting several shadow spells. Probably the most notable of them is going to be Drain Soul. I think I mentioned already, but Drain Soul is getting buffed in the core set. It's going to deal 3 damage, which is going to make it a very playable card. And compare this with Tamsin, like 5 mana, Drain Soul, and then Drain Soul another thing. You heal for 6, kill 2 things. That seems pretty powerful. Another good card with Tamsin is going to be Mortal Coil, which is also a shadow spell. There's also 5 mana Siphon Soul, so like you can double Siphon Soul in a control mirror, which is like kind of one of the big strengths of this card, I think. Depending on the matchup, you can use it to get an extra copy of whatever spell you need. Like against aggro, you're going to play it with Drain Soul most likely, but against control, it maintains relevance because of Siphon Soul. And you can even use it to copy Grimoire of Sacrifice, the card we just looked at. This is actually a whenever effect, so I believe you can actually sacrifice the Tamsin and still get the extra copy of Grimoire of Sacrifice, which is pretty nice. Unfortunately, you can't really use it with Soul Rend, even though that is a shadow spell, because this will die to the Soul Rend. But we've already got a pretty good set of like 3 or 4 shadow spells that can work with this. I also tried looking at some of the spells from the past year that haven't been updated yet, and like maybe Wicked Whispers could be a shadow spell. I don't really know how to evaluate what's a shadow spell, but I don't know what other kind of spell Wicked Whispers would be. And if you can get an extra copy of Wicked Whispers in your hand, then like Tamsin starts looking pretty good in Zoo. Maybe you play like a couple Mortal Coils to go with it or something. And then like maybe, actually it doesn't work with Raise Dead, but maybe it works with like Philosophy, maybe it works with like the Soul Fragment cards. I really don't know how to evaluate whether these things would work or not, but I think there's a lot of potential for this card, certainly in control, and maybe in some sort of more aggressive Warlock archetype as well. Next up we have Cariel Rome, who I assume has some sort of lore connection to the previous minion we looked at. But this one's a Paladin legendary. 4 mana 4/3 Rush, Divine Shield. Whenever this attacks, reduce the cost of holy spells in your hand by 1. So yeah, this card looks really freaking strong, I would say. Paladin has in the past had a 4 mana 4/3 Divine Shield. It was called the Glass Knight. And the Glass Knight saw some play. You didn't really ever restore the Divine Shield on it. It was just a 4 mana 4/3 Divine Shield that was pretty good. This is a 4 mana 4/3 Divine Shield, but also it has Rush. So even without holy spells, you probably just jam this in your Paladin deck, I would imagine. Just seems like a good stat line. But it turns out that the extra text on this card is also just really strong. The first thing I thought of with this is that it discounts a couple of the Paladin secrets, Avenge and the new one, Reckoning. So then you have 0 cost Paladin secrets in your hand, and you can curve this straight into the other Paladin legendary, Cannon Master Smith, I think it's called, that transforms your secrets into 3/3s. So like that's a really insane curve. 4 mana 4/3 Rush Divine Shield into 10/10 worth of stats on the following turn, if you happen to hit one of each secret. That's a really nice high roll. But even outside of that high roll, it turns out Paladin just has a lot of good holy spells. Equality Consecration, Blessing of Kings, those are all things that you would be really happy to get discounts on. And there are actually several Paladin spells from the last year that could potentially be holy spells. Rally could maybe be a holy spell. I think I've heard that the Libram stuff is supposed to be holy spells. So like extra discounts on, you know, any of the 3 Libram cards. Seems like Hand of Adal could maybe be a holy spell. Blessing of Authority probably could, if Blessing of Kings is. Maybe Shield of Honor or Wave of Apathy. I don't really know what's going on in these card arts. But yeah, that's a lot of potentially really strong stuff with Cariel Rome. And as I've said, this card really needs like basically no help to see play. It's just like all upside on what ends up being a holy spell. And there's a ton of holy spells that are good support with this. So yeah, I think this card is just really good, and you probably put it in all of your Paladin decks. Next up we have Veteran War Medic, another Paladin card. 4 mana 3/5, after you cast a holy spell, summon a 2/2 medic with lifesteal. So I mean, you can compare this to Violet Teacher. Same stat line, but instead of 1/1s, you get to make 2/2s with lifesteal, which is a pretty significant bonus for this card. And we can pair this rather with Cariel Rome. You discount all your holy spells. I mentioned the secrets that work with Cannon Master Smith. Turns out they work with this as well. There's also a new spell in the core set that's 2 mana, give +1 attack to any Silverhand recruits you make this game. So you can Cariel on 4, and then follow that up with Veteran War Medic, something that buffs all your recruits for the rest of the game, and you get a 2/2 with lifesteal out of it. I think you pretty much only need to make like 1 2/2 with this for it to just be worth it on stats. And then, you know, sometimes you just throw down an Avenge and a Reckoning along with it, and that's more 2/2s. I think this card just seems really solid. Also, from what I've heard, the Libram stuff is going to be holy as well. And, like, it's pretty easy to make Libram of Wisdom cost 0 mana, right? Sometimes you just make this cost 0 mana even without Cariel Rome. So, yeah, pretty easy to get some good payoff with this card, I think. And I think even, like, on the Paladin secrets, if those aren't discounted, like, Avenge is already worth 1 mana. If you can make a 2/2 lifesteal with it as well, that's pretty good. I think this card is just, like, pretty solid. It's definitely a card that you might just like not have room for in your deck. It depends a lot on what the Paladin decks are going to be looking like. But yeah, a lot of potential here, depending on what becomes a holy spell at least. Next up we have another holy spell, Invigorating Sermon. 4 mana, give +1/+1 to all minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield. This card I'm not too sure about. Keleseth obviously had a very powerful effect, but that came down on turn 2, this comes down on turn 4. It's a lot worse to skip your turn 4 than it is to play like a slightly understated thing on turn 2. This does of course buff your field and your hand, so you can get some more immediate use out of it. But as far as your hand goes, you still have to play like a 4 mana do nothing sort of thing, and then get like finally play the stuff out of your hand to get value out of it. And buffing your battlefield, I mean, giving your board +1/+1 is worth like 1 or 2 mana compared to some previous cards. So even if you happen to have a very strong board curving into this, it's still a pretty big hit to your tempo on turn 4 for some payoff going forward that might even take like several turns to really get value out of. If you're going like Eldor Attendant into Hand of Adal into Goody 2 Shields, I feel like you'd rather just play like some bomb 4-drop to continue the tempo rather than the Invigorating Sermon, give your board like +2/+2 or whatever. Seems a little bit underwhelming. And also, if we look back at Keleseth decks that played this similar effect, or even like Embiggen decks played a somewhat similar effect, those decks tended to be really minion heavy, and Paladin decks at least currently aren't really that minion heavy. You've got like the Libram stuff. Even if like a more aggressive Paladin gets pushed, it seems like that deck might have a lot of secrets in it. So it's like pretty common that you would play this and then like the stuff you draw into or the stuff in your hand isn't necessarily even getting buffed. So I don't know, I think this card's pretty awkward. I think it might end up just costing too much mana. But if the meta is like really slow and grindy, this is something you can definitely get a ton of value out of. And finally for this video, we've got Tavish Stormpike, a Hunter legendary. 3 mana 2/5, after a friendly beast attacks, summon a beast from your deck that costs 1 less. So very powerful effect on this card. People have actually already theory crafted OTKs with it. With turn 9, you play this plus Wild Bloodstinger. The Wild Bloodstinger pulls out Tundra Rhino. And then, you know, Tundra Rhino pulls out a 4, which has charge, which pulls out a 3, which has charge. And you can hit your opponent in the face for a ton of damage with Tavish plus the Bloodstinger. Now that's going to be a wild exclusive combo, but you can actually do some big flashy stuff with it in standard as well. So on turn 8 you could play this alongside Trampling Rhino, and then Trampling Rhino pulls out Mok'Nathal Lion, which pulls out Zixor Apex Predator, and then I don't think there's anything to continue the chain after that, but you get any 2-cost beast, which is a lot of stats for 8 mana, and a lot of pseudo card draw for 8 mana as well. And on that particular list of cards, like Zixor and Trampling Rhino are already pretty good, and Mok'Nathal Lion's not that bad. But I don't think this card needs to be nearly that flashy to be good. 3 mana 2/5, it's already got a pretty solid stat line. And it seems like it might even just be pretty good on curve. I don't really know what 2 mana beast you're going to be playing. Maybe just like a Scavenging Hyena, or I don't know, River Croc or Direwolf Alpha, Mana Feeder Panthara, something like that. And then you just play this on 3, hit with your 2-cost beast, and maybe it pulls out that new Sunscale Raptor card. So 3 mana 2/5, make a 1/3. I mean, that's just pretty good. And it seems like this maintains relevance at a lot of points in the game. But that's if you can manage to have enough beasts in your deck for this to be relevant. And just looking at the current beast pool, it seems like there's not really like a ton of super good beasts. And Hunter is losing like Kill Command, Animal Companion, Houndmaster, a bunch of things that would give you a big incentive to play beasts. And as far as the 2-drop example I gave earlier, like, it's nice if it pulls Sunscale Raptor, but you probably want to be playing Wolpertinger, and that's a bit of a low roll. So, I don't know how much the card pool is really going to support this card, but I actually don't think it needs much support at all. I think any sort of like mid-range hunter would play this. I think even Face Hunter is probably pretty interested in this card. And I guess we do need to keep in mind that Scavenger's Ingenuity is still sticking around, so there's still quite a lot of incentive for Hunter to be playing Beasts. So I actually think this card is quite likely to see play. Very powerful card. Some big flashy stuff, but even without that, just like a little bit of value out of it is quite strong.